In this video, I'm going to show you the settings that I use with my Sony FX30 and really all of my Sony mirrorless cameras to get the best results possible and shoot cinematic videos. Hey, what's going on? My name is Peter Sorellis. I'm a videographer and editor from Toronto. I specialize in sports videography, and I'm going to take you through the menu and really deep dive this Sony FX30 and go over all the menu settings and the memory recall presets that I set up to shoot cinematic videos and get really good results out of this crop sensor camera, and some of the shortcuts and like tricks that I set up to edit those memory recall presets quickly and make sure that I always have presets that work for me even as conditions change. So I've got a camera set up just over here that's filming my computer screen, which has the menu on it because I wanted to have this camera in my hand and I actually couldn't figure out how to record an HDMI input into a computer without a capture card. So if anyone knows how to do that, please let me know. But we're gonna roll like this for this video and it should be fine for the purpose of conveying information. The first thing I want to talk about is setting up some of those important settings that you want to have set by default and don't want to have to change every time you switch from one preset to another. So for me, some of those settings include focus breathing compensation, enabling proxies, my autofocus settings, my steady shot settings, or in camera stabilization settings, I guess. To set these, you're gonna wanna go into the menu, and before you start to actually like make your memory recall presets, change this stuff. So we can go to image stabilization here under the shooting tab, click steady shot and change it to what you want. I shoot a lot of sports and I'm usually handheld, so active steady shot is actually really useful for me. So I'm usually doing active. We want to also at this time, let's go to proxy shooting. So here, shooting one, image quality, proxy settings. We want proxies on. We want to shoot XAVC SHD, and that is good. You can set your audio recording level if you want that to be nice and low. I usually keep it really low, and then turn the gain up on my microphone to compensate. Just anything like that throughout the menu that you want to have set. Maybe you have exposure settings that you want to have dialed in across all of your presets. Dial these in now before you set presets for frame rate and shutter speed and ISO and all that stuff. That way you don't need to go back and change them all later. Now, when you're actually setting up your memory recall presets, I like to do this quickly by taking advantage of camera shortcuts. So if you go to your setup tab here, you can go to operation customize, and we're gonna set a custom key for video. And then you can see that you can kind of like browse down and click on all of the different buttons here. But we wanna come specifically to the custom buttons on the top of the camera. And on the FX30, I like setting custom button 1 on the top of the camera. It says iris next to it on the actual camera, to camera set memory. And when you click camera set memory, let's just get out of here, it will bring you to this page. And in this page, if you click on 1, 2, or 3, the settings that you currently have across your camera are going to apply to preset 1, 2, or 3. That way, if you want to make a small tweak to a setting, for example, change your white balance as the sun sets and the stadium lights come on when you're filming a sports game, you can quickly click the white balance button, bring your white balance down, click the one shortcut, and then click on your memory recall preset, and that new preset with your adjustment will be saved. Now let's actually dive into my presets because I got them all messed up here and not set the way I want to, and I want to get these set properly. So let's go to memory recall preset number 1. And I like this to be my 4K 24 setting. So this is true 24 frames per second at a native ISO with the aperture open. And I'll usually put an ND filter on if I want to adjust this. So to do this setting, we're going to come to our shooting tab. And you want to set the file format to XAVCS 4K. Our moving settings are going to be 24p. Our record setting is 100 megabits 4.2 to 10-bit. I like to have my proxies on so that I'm getting proxy files of my footage as I'm shooting it. I can take those and start editing on them right away. And then my ISO is set to 800 and my white balance is set to 5600, which is daylight. I do have this tweaked for the white balance a little bit towards the magenta, probably a little bit more than I would typically do. So let's move that back. And so with the Sony cameras, I sometimes like to just move everything a little more towards the magenta for my presets. So we're going to just leave our white balance like this at 5600 Kelvin. Our ISO is at 800, which is the lower of the dual base ISOs on the FX30. Oh, and for shutter, I should show you how to get this 48 shutter exactly and shoot in true 24 rather than 1/50. Now look, filming with a 1/48 shutter versus a 1/50 shutter realistically is not noticeable. Like, you will not pick it out unless you're like specifically looking for it, and even then, I honestly doubt it. But with the update to the FX30, if you're fully updated on the newest firmware, you actually can use that flicker control setting to dial in your shutter to be exactly 1/48. So let me show you how to do that real quick. If you come under shooting mode and go to shutter/silent and go to anti-flicker set, you can set that on and then go to variable shutter set. And now you can just make adjustments to this as you want and really put the shutter speed at anything that you want. So we're going to put it at 48 flat so that we're shooting 1/48, but you can like tweak this as you need to. And this is a setting that's made to like compensate for flickering lights in your image. So you can dial the shutter speed to give you the least flicker possible. But you can also just use it to adjust your shutter speed to be exactly 1/double your frame rate. Now with this completely set, we're going to click 1 and click there, and that is registered. Our memory preset number 1 is done. Now let's go to memory recall preset number 2. And I like this to be my 4K 60 frames per second preset. So you can see that we're already set here, but there are some problems with this. First, we want to bring our aperture down to f2.8. This is the Tamron 35 to 150 f2 to 2.8. I set everything to a constant f2.8 on this lens. If I'm going to shoot lower than that on a certain focal length, I'll set that on my own. If I'm using a lens like the Sony 70-200mm f4, like the macro version of that I just made a video on, you can watch up here, or even the first version of it, which I've used forever, then I'll just set all these presets to f4. But if you put an f4 lens on and your memory recall presets are set to f2.8, then everything's just going to default to the lowest possible aperture. Whereas if you set your memory recall presets with an f4 lens and then put on a lens that goes down to f2.8 or lower, then these memory recall presets are going to default to f4 where it was set. Anyways, let's go into the menu and set up this setting. So we're going to go file format, again, XAVCS 4K. Movie setting, we want 60 frames per second and 200 megabits 422 10-bit. S&Q settings, not going to worry about that. We'll talk about S&Q at the end. And then we want to go into our proxy settings, and again, make sure proxies are on. Don't know if I talked about this, but log shooting settings, I like to use flexible ISO. Now, most of the time, I'm shooting at a base ISO anyways. I know the base ISOs in the FX30 are 800 and 2500, but sometimes to like get the perfect exposure without being overexposed, it makes more sense to just shoot at like 1000, 1600, a slightly different ISO. And I don't like the option of having only 2 ISOs at my disposal. I don't care if it takes me longer to turn a wheel to get between them. I like being able to shoot at any ISO I want without going into my menu. So that's why I do that. Anyways, with that said, this is pretty much dialed in. We just need to make sure that my shutter speed is good. And a lot of the time when I'm filming sports videos, I like to overcrank my shutter, which means have a faster shutter speed than what I would typically have if I was filming at a 180-degree shutter angle. In this video up here where I talk about the best frame rates to use, I go over pretty extensively. But for this, we're going to leave our shutter at 1/320 so that we can get less motion blur than normal, which I think looks really good for filming action and sports, which is what I mostly do. Our white balance is already set to 5600 with a slight shift towards magenta. So we'll leave that. Then we're going to click our shortcut of 1, go to memory recall preset number 2, and click the middle button, and that is set. Now my third preset that I like to use, if we go down to 3, is a 4K 120 setting. You can see that we already are in 4K 120 frames per second. So let's just double check that. XAVCS 4K movie settings 120p, 280 megabits per second, 422 10-bit color. Proxies are actually off for this setting. You cannot film proxies in camera on the FX30 in 4K 120, which is disappointing but completely understandable. So proxies can stay off for that, and everything else is just pretty much the same. We're going to set our shutter speed a little bit faster though. There's kind of an assumption that I need more light to film at 120 frames per second than to film at 60 frames per second. So I just overcrank a little bit more when I'm filming at 120. I'll leave my shutter at 1/500. We'll bring our iris down to f2.8 for reasons that we already have spoken about in this video. And let's tweak our white balance. This one is set a little bit too far into the magentas based on the last game I was filming, but I'd like to keep it right here. So that's set. My ISO is at 800 right now, but I actually like for this to turn my ISO up to 2500 because normally you need more light for 120 frames per second filming. And to get more light, I may as well just film at the higher of the dual base ISOs. So with this set, we are now going to click the 1 button, go to 3, and register. And we're not done yet, so don't be clicking away. We're going to go to our S&Q settings. So my S&Q setting is typically 4K 24 and 5 times slow motion, as you can see here. So we're filming 120 frames per second. That comes out at 20% speed. So for these, we're just going to change our settings here. We'll keep this at 1/500, f2.8, turn our ISO up to 2500 like we said, and let's tweak our white balance slightly towards the magentas, just like that. So if you go to file format, this is still going to be XAVC S4K. Movie settings are not relevant for us. You can see it's still set to 120. But what we really want to deal with here is our S&Q settings. So our recording frame rate is going to be 24p. The frame rate is going to be set to 120, and this is going to give us 5 times slow motion. And then for a recording setting, we're going to set 100 megabits 422 10-bit. If you prefer to film your S&Q in 60 frames per second, just change this to 60 FPS, and then you can leave your recording setting here. And then you'll get 60 FPS, and you can adjust your shutter speed and your ISO accordingly. But we're going to leave this. You don't actually have to click the 1 button and click anywhere for this. For this one, if I change to say memory recall preset number 1, and then we go back to S&Q mode, all the same S&Q settings will apply. And that's the gist of it. So if this video was helpful to you, then subscribe to the channel because I post videography and video editing tips tutorial videos similar to this on a regular basis. I would love to have you around for that. I'm gonna get back into my editing bag pretty soon and make some more editing tutorials for this channel. That's something that I've really been missing, and I'm so excited to share with you again. So stay tuned for that. If you have any questions about anything we talked about here, drop it down in the comment section. I'd love to chat with you guys down there. And that's going to be all for today. So until next time, peace.